Two ships are feeling their way up the same dark river, and each one can see the other. It is just before 2 o'clock in the morning, the 29th of May, 1914. The place is the mouth of the St. Lawrence, near a point of land called Pointe-au-Père, Father Point, where the outbound pilots step off and ocean liners are handed back to the open sea. Coming down the river, low and heavy, is a Norwegian collier, the Storstad, her holds packed with coal. Coming up the river, tall and lit like a small city, is the Empress of Ireland, a Canadian Pacific liner bound for Liverpool with more than 1,400 people aboard. They have seen each other's lights. This was not a blind ship in a black night. Each crew marked the other's masthead lamps across a mile of calm water and judged in the ordinary way of the river how they would pass. And then a bank of fog came off the land and settled between them. 14 minutes after the two hulls touched, the Empress of Ireland was gone. 1,012 people died with her, more paying passengers than were lost on the Titanic, and almost no one remembers her name. The two nations asked each other the same question for years afterward, in water that both crews knew on a night that began so calmly. How? The Empress of Ireland was not a legend. She was a workhorse, and that was rather the point of her. She was launched on the Clyde in January of 1906, built at the Fairfield yard at Govan for the Canadian Pacific Railway, a company that owned the trains across Canada and wanted the ships that fed them. 14,000 tons, 570 feet long, 2 funnels, twin screws, good for 18 knots. Her job was the North Atlantic ferry, Liverpool to Quebec and back, again and again, carrying the mail, the silver, the first-class travelers up top, and, down in the third class, the steady tide of people moving to a new country. She had done it for 8 years without serious trouble. She was comfortable rather than grand, a first-class dining saloon, panelled suites named for the Duke and Duchess of Connaught, a promenade deck where passengers played shuffleboard in the afternoon light, and she was, on paper, a safe ship. She carried more than enough lifeboats. She was divided below the waterline into watertight compartments, but her watertight doors had to be closed by hand, by men reaching them in time. The rule of the day expected exactly that. A passenger ship of her class was required to be able to close her watertight doors, and her crew were meant to drill at working them so the bulkheads could be sealed quickly when the order came. The whole scheme of survival rested on the doors going shut before a compartment filled, and along her lower decks, at the level where the sea would come, ran rows of portholes, brass-rimmed openings that passengers were free to swing open on a warm night for the air. Here, the rule was blunter than the practice. A ship's regulations required the lower portholes to be kept closed and secured while she was at sea, precisely because an open port low in the hull was a hole the sea could use. On a calm, warm night, that rule was easy to let slip. The portholes matter. They sit at the quiet center of what happened. She left Quebec City on the afternoon of the 28th of May at 4:30, under a captain new to her. His name was Henry Kendall, and he had commanded larger ships, but this was his first descent of the St. Lawrence in the Empress. A river captain earns the river slowly. Kendall was a careful man with the currents still learning his hand. Aboard were 1,057 passengers and 420 crew. In first class, 87, in second, 253, in the crowded third class, 717, emigrants and returning workers, families in the cheapest berths deep in the hull. Among the second-class passengers were the people this ship is most remembered for by anyone who remembers her at all. About 170 members of the Salvation Army, officers and soldiers, and the whole of the Canadian staff band, were sailing to a great international congress of their movement in London. They had played on deck as the ship came down the river, brass and drums over the water, and they were photographed together in their uniforms before they left. Of that contingent, all but 8 would die. The memorial their movement raised speaks of 167 of their people, promoted to glory, as they put it, at daybreak on that Friday morning. There were names among the rest that the papers would carry. The English actor and dramatist Laurence Irving, son of the great Sir Henry Irving, travelling with his wife, the actress Mabel Hackney, the explorer and writer Henry Seton-Karr, and a great many people the record barely holds at all, the third-class families, the children. There were 138 children aboard. 134 of them did not live to see the morning. The evening was calm. The river was smooth. It was, by every account, an ordinary crossing beginning in an ordinary way. Just before 1:30 in the morning, the Empress reached Pointe-au-Père and stopped to let her pilot off. That done, she came around and stood out toward the open gulf, building to her cruising speed on a clear night with good visibility. Off her bow, some distance down the river, her watch marked the masthead lights of a ship coming up toward them. It was the Storstad, a Norwegian collier, 6,000 tons, loaded with somewhere near 11,000 tons of coal, bound for Montreal. Her captain, Thomas Andersen, was below. His first officer, Alfred Toftenes, had the watch. Both ships saw the other. Both crews made the ordinary judgment of how they would clear. The rules of the road governed exactly this moment. A vessel that lost sight of another in fog was required to go at a moderate speed, slow enough to stop within the distance she could see, and to signal her movements on her whistle so the other could track her by ear. Where 2 ships had already sighted each other and agreed in effect how to pass, each was bound to hold the course and speed that agreement assumed, and to warn the other before changing it. And then, off the land, a fog bank rolled across the water between them and shut the other ship's lights out completely. Here, the 2 accounts divide, and they never truly came back together. Kendall said he stopped his engines and sounded his whistle 3 blasts, the signal that his engines were going astern, and waited for the fog to lift, expecting the Storstad to pass safely down his side. Instead, out of the grey, the collier's bow appeared, coming straight for him. He rang for full speed ahead and swung hard, trying to turn out of the blow. It was too late. The Storstad struck the Empress on the starboard side, near the middle of the ship, and drove her reinforced ice-breaking bow deep into the hull below the waterline. Then the 2 ships parted in the fog. The wound was mortal at once. The sea came in through the torn plating faster than any pump could answer, by one estimate tons of water every second. The ship began to list to starboard within moments, and as she leaned, the open portholes on the lower decks swung down to meet the river and drew it in through every one of them. The list came so fast that the lifeboats on the high side could not be launched at all, and there was barely time to free the ones on the low side. Down in the 3rd class, people woke in flooding passageways in the dark, the deck tilting under them, and could not find the way up. Captain Kendall was on his bridge giving orders when the ship rolled out from under him and threw him into the water. 14 minutes after the collision, the Empress of Ireland lay on her side, then went down by the head in about 130 feet of water. Where a lit ship had been, there was fog and cold river and people in it. The Storstad, her bow crushed but still afloat, lowered her own boats and began pulling survivors from the water, some 400 and more of them. Kendall was among those brought aboard the collier, and he went straight to her bridge, where he said to Captain Andersen the words the inquiry would put on the record, "You have sunk my ship." 20 of those she rescued died of the cold before morning, even so. Of everyone who had sailed, 465 lived, 1,012 did not. When 2 crews each swear the other ship turned across their path, someone has to sit and weigh it. 2 inquiries did, and they did not agree. The first and most famous was the Canadian Commission, held at Quebec within weeks, presided over by Lord Mersey, the same jurist who had led the British Titanic inquiry 2 years before. Mersey's court heard both crews at length, each swearing they had held their course, and its report said of that testimony bluntly, "The stories are irreconcilable." The commissioners could come to no other conclusion than that it was the Storstad, hidden in the fog, that had ported her helm and altered her course to starboard, swinging her bow across the water and into the Empress. It faulted the collier's first officer Toftenes for changing course in fog without calling his captain to the bridge, the very thing the rules of the road were written to prevent. In the Canadian finding, the blame was Norwegian. The Storstad side never accepted it. Captain Andersen maintained flatly that it was the Empress that had changed heading in the fog, that his ship had held her course and the liner had turned across him. He was reported to have called Lord Mersey a fool for the verdict, and he and his owners pressed the opposite case in the courts. Where the Canadian inquiry read the evidence one way, the Norwegian side read the very same night the other way, and each was certain. Some of this can be settled and some cannot. The precise geometry of that turn, which helm went over and when, happened inside a fog bank with no one outside to see it, and it may never be fully known. But underneath the question of whose helm turned lie causes that are not in dispute, and those are the ones that killed 1,000 people. The fog itself is the first. 2 ships had sighted each other and fixed a plan to pass, and then lost sight of each other entirely, each now guessing at the other's motion by sound alone. In that blindness, a small misjudgment by either crew was enough. The speed of the sinking is the second, and it comes back to the ship's own design and discipline. The watertight doors that might have slowed the flooding had to be closed by hand, by men who had 14 minutes and a deck already falling away beneath them. The rule had asked for those doors to be shut fast on the order. The 14 minutes did not allow it, and the portholes, the open portholes on that warm night, turned the whole lower side of the ship into an open mouth the moment she began to lean. Water that the bulkheads might have held instead poured straight in above them. Those ports were supposed to have been closed and secured at sea, and they were standing open. A ship built to survive one wound was undone by 100 small openings no one had thought to close. Under the argument lies a chain, fog, a contested turn, manual doors, open ports, and a list too fast to fight. Remove any single link and more people live. The Empress of Ireland changed the rules for the ships that came after her, quietly and without her name attached. The disaster fed directly into the International Conference on the Safety of Life at Sea, the work begun after the Titanic, and it sharpened the questions that conference was already asking. The question was no longer simply whether a ship carried enough boats. It was whether her people could reach them and launch them in the minutes they actually had. Bulkhead design, the closing of watertight doors, the discipline of portholes on passenger ships. These were the things a fast, one-sided sinking forced back onto the table. The Empress had had lifeboats to spare and still lost 2 people in 3 because time and water beat the boats to it. That is a lesson written into modern practice. The wreck herself was worked over for a season by hard-hat divers who brought up the mail, the silver bullion in her strongroom, and later her bell and compass and fittings. One diver died in that work. Then she was left to the river. Today, she lies where she fell, off Pointe-au-Père, slowly taking on silt. In 1999, the government of Quebec named her a site of historical and archaeological importance, the first underwater site in the province to be protected that way. She is a grave, and she is treated as one. Ashore at Rimouski, on the coastal road above the water that took them, there is a monument to the dead. In the cemeteries, the stones go on, a common grave for the unidentified, whose names the river kept, and the Salvation Army's own memorial to its 167, who set out to make music at a congress in London and got no farther than the mouth of the St. Lawrence. Their band still marks the day each year. A few of them are known by name: Laurence Irving and Mabel Hackney, the actors, who by one account would not be parted in the water, the explorer Henry Seton-Karr, and a girl named Grace Hanagan, 7 years old that night, who lived, the last survivor of them all, carrying the memory of it until 1995. 1,012 people, 14 minutes, a fog bank that came off the land at the wrong moment between two ships that had already seen each other. The river runs quiet over her now, and that is her last known position.